The galaxy had grown quiet since the Terran embassy opened on Kepler Station. For the first time in centuries, the great powers of the Galactic Council found themselves sharing space with beings they couldn't quite understand. Humans were small, fragile-looking creatures with soft skin and limited natural weapons. They breathed a common atmosphere mix and seemed pleasant enough in their diplomatic exchanges. Most species had dismissed them as another minor addition to the Council's ever-growing roster of civilizations. Zrakthor had different ideas. The Valkyrian warrior stood nearly 3 meters tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the station's artificial lighting. His forearms ended in razor-sharp claws, and his mandibles clicked with barely contained aggression as he watched the human delegation move through the station's central hub. The Valkyrians had ruled through strength for millennia, their empire built on the simple principle that the strong consumed the weak. They had conquered dozens of worlds, enslaved hundreds of species, and established themselves as the most feared military force in the known galaxy. These humans troubled him, not because they appeared threatening, quite the opposite. Their delegation consisted of soft-spoken diplomats in simple clothing, scientists with kind eyes, and a handful of what they called military advisors, who seemed more interested in observing than intimidating. It was precisely this lack of obvious strength that set Zrakthor's instincts on edge. In his experience, any species confident enough to approach the Galactic Council without visible weapons or impressive physical capabilities either possessed hidden power or represented a civilization far more dangerous than it appeared. The Valkyrian intelligence networks had been unusually quiet about human capabilities. Oh, they had gathered the basics. Humans came from a world called Earth, possessed faster-than-light travel, and had unified their planet under something called the United Nations. But details about their military capabilities, their weapons technology, even their basic combat doctrines remained frustratingly elusive. The humans seemed remarkably skilled at deflecting such inquiries with polite smiles and requests to focus on peaceful cooperation. Zrakthor's war-scarred exoskeleton told a different story than the humans' gentle diplomacy. Every dent and scratch represented a victory. Every healed crack marked another species that had underestimated Valkyrian might and paid the price. He had personally led the assault on 7 different worlds, watching lesser beings flee before his clan's unstoppable advance. The pattern was always the same: initial resistance, desperate defense, inevitable surrender, and finally integration into the Valkyrian Empire as either slaves or tribute-paying vassals. But something in the humans' behavior suggested they weren't like the others. He had been observing them for 3 standard days now, noting their interactions, their body language, their responses to various stimuli. The diplomats maintained perfect composure even when discussing topics that should have been threatening. The scientists asked probing questions about Valkyrian biology and technology with genuine curiosity rather than fear. Most telling of all, their military advisors watched everything with calm, calculating eyes that missed nothing. Particularly one human who went by the simple designation Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. The human was smaller than average even for his species, standing perhaps 1.7 meters in his standard-issue utility uniform. His hair was cut short in what appeared to be a military fashion, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who had spent considerable time in harsh conditions. Unlike the other humans, who moved through the station with tourist-like wonder, Rodriguez carried himself with an economy of motion that spoke of professional competence. Zrakthor had observed many warriors from dozens of species. He recognized the subtle signs, the way Rodriguez positioned himself to maintain sightlines to exits, how his eyes constantly tracked potential threats, the careful space he maintained between himself and others. This was not a diplomat or scientist playing at being military. This was a predator wearing the uniform of prey. The revelation both excited and concerned him. The Valkyrian way demanded strength be tested. It was not enough to assume power. Power had to be proven, demonstrated, and acknowledged. For 3 days, Zrakthor had watched these humans interact with other council species with apparent weakness, accepting slights and insults that should have provoked immediate violent response. The Thornican delegate had openly mocked human appearance. The Zilani representative had questioned their right to seek council membership. The Moravian ambassador had suggested humans might be better suited as servants than equals. In each case, the human response had been measured, diplomatic, even gracious. They absorbed insults like sponges absorbed water, showing no anger, no wounded pride, no desire for retaliation. For any other species, Zrakthor would have dismissed such behavior as cowardice and moved on to more interesting prey. But Rodriguez's eyes told a different story. While the diplomats smiled and deflected, while the scientists maintained their polite curiosity, Rodriguez watched, and in his watching, Zrakthor saw something he had not encountered in over a decade of conquest, another apex predator measuring potential prey. The station's central plaza buzzed with activity as representatives from 47 different species conducted business, negotiated treaties, and engaged in the complex social dynamics that kept galactic civilization functioning. Vendors sold exotic foods from a dozen worlds. Holographic displays advertised everything from mining equipment to vacation packages on paradise planets, and the constant hum of universal translators created a linguistic symphony of interspecies communication. Zrakthor made his decision. The challenge would be formal, conducted according to ancient Valkyrian tradition. He would publicly question human strength, demand proof of their worthiness to stand among the great powers, and settle the matter through single combat. If they proved weak, as he suspected, the humans would withdraw their petition for council membership and accept protectorate status under Valkyrian oversight. If they proved strong, well, that remained to be seen. He approached the human delegation during their afternoon break, his massive form cutting through the plaza crowds like a predator moving through tall grass. Conversations quieted as beings recognized his approach, some species having learned through bitter experience to give Valkyrian warriors a wide berth. The humans, however, simply looked up from their data tablets and cups of what appeared to be a dark, aromatic beverage. "Ambassador Chen," Zrakthor's voice carried the authority of conquest as his translator rendered his words into human standard. "I would speak with your delegation regarding matters of honor and strength." The lead human diplomat, a middle-aged female with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes, stood to greet him. "Warrior Zrakthor, how may we help you?" "Your species seeks membership in the Galactic Council," he stated, his forearms spread in what humans would not recognize as a formal challenge posture. "Yet you show no strength. You bear no visible weapons. You have conquered no worlds. You demonstrate no military might. By what right do you claim equality with those who have earned their positions through power?" Ambassador Chen's expression remained pleasant, but Rodriguez shifted almost imperceptibly behind her. Not forward, not into a defensive position, but into what Zrakthor's combat experience recognized as an optimal striking angle. "Interesting. We believe," Chen replied carefully, "that strength comes in many forms. We seek to contribute to the Council through knowledge, cooperation, and peaceful development." "Pretty words," Zrakthor's mandibles clicked dismissively. "But the galaxy is not governed by pretty words. It is governed by those strong enough to enforce their will. I have crushed 17 species who believed as you do. Their pretty words became screams, and their screams became silence." The plaza had grown noticeably quieter, other beings recognizing the familiar pattern of Valkyrian intimidation. Some species began discreetly moving away, having learned that proximity to Valkyrian challenges often resulted in collateral damage. Rodriguez stepped forward. The movement was subtle, professional, completely non-threatening by any outward measure. Yet Zrakthor's predator instincts immediately focused on the small human male with the intensity of a hunter sighting prey. There was something in Rodriguez's posture, something in the way he held himself, that suggested Ambassador Chen's diplomatic solutions might not represent the full scope of human capabilities. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps," the human said simply, his voice carrying none of the diplomat's careful modulation. It was flat, factual, and completely without fear. "Is there something specific you wanted to discuss, Warrior Zrakthor?" The directness surprised him. Not the content. Many species had attempted to stand before Valkyrian might with various degrees of bravado, but Rodriguez spoke without bluster, without obvious preparation for combat, without any of the usual posturing that preceded conflict. He simply stood there, waiting, as if Zrakthor represented nothing more threatening than a maintenance request. "I challenge your species' right to council membership," Zrakthor declared formally. "Humans appear weak, unworthy to stand among the strong. I demand proof of your worthiness through trial by combat, single combat, as is tradition. Winner determines whether humans are accepted as equals or relegated to their proper place as servants." The silence that followed stretched long enough for Zrakthor to catalog Rodriguez's responses. No increased heart rate. The human's visible pulse remained steady. No defensive posturing. If anything, Rodriguez seemed to relax slightly. No obvious fear responses. His pupils remained normal, his breathing unchanged. Most telling of all, no consultation with his diplomatic superiors. Rodriguez was clearly authorized to make his own decisions in such circumstances. "When and where?" Rodriguez asked. Ambassador Chen started to protest, but Rodriguez raised one hand slightly, a gesture so small that most beings would have missed it, but Zrakthor's warrior instincts caught the motion immediately. Command authority. This small human male possessed command authority over beings technically superior to him in the delegation hierarchy. Fascinating. "The station's main arena," Zrakthor replied, his excitement building. "Tomorrow at midday, combat to surrender or death, as determined by the victor. Standard Council neutrality protocols apply." "Understood," Rodriguez nodded once. "Any weapons restrictions?" "None. Bring whatever advantages your species possesses." "I'll be there." The human turned and walked away, not hurrying, not looking back, simply moving toward whatever preparations he deemed necessary. Zrakthor watched him go with growing anticipation. Tomorrow would answer the question that had been troubling his warrior instincts for 3 days. Just how dangerous were these humans, really? As news of the challenge spread through the station, various species began placing bets through the underground gambling networks that flourished in any large gathering of diverse beings. The odds heavily favored the Valkyrian warrior. Zrakthor stood 3 meters tall, weighed approximately 4 times what Rodriguez weighed, possessed natural weapons, wore battle-tested armor, and had never lost single combat in over 2 decades of challenges. Rodriguez, by contrast, appeared to be an average member of an unknown species with no visible advantages and no reputation for martial prowess. The arena filled slowly as word spread throughout Kepler Station. What had begun as routine diplomatic meetings now promised to become the most significant military demonstration in recent galactic history. Representatives from 47 species claimed viewing positions, some motivated by curiosity, others by the opportunity to assess human capabilities, and many simply drawn by the spectacle of what most assumed would be a brief but decisive display of Valkyrian superiority. Rodriguez spent the night in preparation, but not in the way most warriors would have anticipated. While Thor performed traditional combat rituals and sharpened his natural weapons to razor perfection, Rodriguez sat in his quarters reviewing technical manuals, not weapons specifications or combat strategies, but detailed anatomical studies of Valkyrian physiology, historical records of their combat techniques, and, most importantly, after-action reports from the 17 species Thor had mentioned conquering. The Marine Corps had taught him that every enemy, no matter how physically superior, possessed exploitable weaknesses. The key was gathering intelligence, analyzing patterns, and developing appropriate responses. Thor might be faster, stronger, and better armed, but he was also predictable. 2 decades of unchallenged victories had given him supreme confidence in his abilities while teaching him nothing about adapting to unexpected tactics. Rodriguez intended to be very unexpected. His equipment selection reflected this philosophy. While regulations permitted any weapons his species possessed, Rodriguez chose items that would appear innocuous to observers while serving multiple tactical purposes. A small medical kit that contained certain chemical compounds, a water bottle filled with a specific mixture, a tablet computer with seemingly innocent educational software. To casual inspection, he appeared to be bringing nothing more threatening than standard diplomatic gear. The real preparation happened in his mind. Rodriguez had spent 12 years in the Marine Corps, including 3 combat deployments to places where superior firepower and technology hadn't guaranteed easy victories. He had learned to think like prey when facing superior predators, to use mobility and intelligence to offset disadvantages in size and strength. Most importantly, he had learned to control fear and channel aggression into precise, calculated action. Thor had made a fundamental error in his assessment. He saw humanity's diplomatic approach and peaceful overtures as evidence of weakness. In reality, they represented restraint. There was a significant difference between being unable to fight and choosing not to fight, though that distinction was often lost on species who had never encountered an opponent capable of making such choices. The arena buzzed with anticipation as midday approached. The Galactic Council had hastily organized formal observation protocols, recognizing that the outcome would significantly impact humanity's petition for membership. If Thor won, human diplomatic efforts would suffer a devastating setback. If Rodriguez somehow prevailed, it would force every species to recalculate their assumptions about human capabilities. Ambassador Chen made one final attempt to resolve the situation diplomatically. "Staff Sergeant, this isn't necessary. We can file formal protests, request mediation, explore alternative approaches to council membership." "Ma'am," Rodriguez replied quietly, "some conversations can only be held in one language. Warrior Thor speaks violence, so that's the language I'll use. After today, there won't be any more questions about whether humans belong here." The arena itself was a simple circular space, 50 meters in diameter, surrounded by elevated seating that allowed clear sight lines for all observers. Force fields prevented audience interference while permitting full sensor recording for official documentation. The floor was made of neutral metallic plating that would provide adequate traction for most species while offering no environmental advantages to either combatant. Thor entered to appreciative clicks and chittering from his supporters in the audience. His exoskeleton had been polished to a mirror shine, and his 4 arms moved in the ritualized patterns of traditional Valkyrian combat preparation. Each claw gleamed like surgical steel, capable of tearing through most armor and certainly through human flesh. His movements demonstrated the fluid coordination of a being bred for warfare, every muscle group working in perfect harmony to maximize lethal potential. Rodriguez entered without fanfare. He wore standard-issue Marine utility uniform, carried his modest selection of equipment, and walked across the arena floor as if reporting for routine duty. The contrast was striking. Where Zrakthor moved like a barely contained explosion of violence, Rodriguez moved like a professional going to work. No wasted motion, no dramatic gestures, no obvious preparation for combat. The audience murmured with confusion. Several species had expected humans to produce some form of impressive weaponry or reveal hidden physical capabilities. Instead, they were watching what appeared to be a maintenance worker facing off against one of the galaxy's most feared predators. Beginning formal challenge protocol, the arena's automated system announced in 17 languages. Combatants will engage until one surrenders, becomes incapacitated, or dies. There are no other rules. Combat begins in 30 seconds. Zrakthor took the traditional Valkyrian combat stance. 4 arms spread wide, claws extended, body lowered for maximum stability and striking power. His mandibles clicked with anticipation as he focused on his small opponent with the intensity of a hunter about to take down wounded prey. Rodriguez simply stood straight, hands at his sides, watching. 10 seconds, the system announced. Zrakthor's muscles tensed for his opening charge. In every previous challenge, he had ended the fight with his first attack, a devastating rush that overwhelmed opponents before they could mount effective defense. Raw speed and violence of action had proven superior to any defensive strategy he had encountered. Combat begins. Zrakthor exploded forward with all the devastating power that had crushed 17 different species. His charge covered 20 meters in under 2 seconds. 4 claws aimed to overwhelm Rodriguez's defensive capabilities through pure aggressive overload. Rodriguez stepped aside. Not a dramatic leap or desperate dodge, but a simple step to his left that placed him precisely outside Zrakthor's attack corridor. The Valkyrian's momentum carried him past Rodriguez's position, forcing him to turn and reposition for a second attack. It was the first time in 2 decades that Zrakthor had missed his opening strike. The audience registered surprise in 17 different ways: chittering, humming, electromagnetic pulse patterns, and various other species-specific responses to unexpected events. Even the betting networks paused as observers recalculated their assessments. Zrakthor's second attack was more measured, advancing with controlled strikes designed to force Rodriguez into defensive positions where superior reach and multiple limbs would provide decisive advantages. His claws moved in complex patterns that had overwhelmed every previous opponent, creating overlapping zones of lethal possibility. Rodriguez moved like he was dancing. Every strike missed by precisely the margin necessary to avoid damage while expending Zrakthor's energy reserves. Rodriguez's movements seemed almost casual. A step here, a lean there, occasionally ducking under a particularly aggressive swipe. He never moved faster than necessary, never traveled farther than required, and never appeared to exert significant effort. Zrakthor began to feel something he had not experienced in decades: uncertainty. His attacks were landing exactly where they were supposed to land. His timing was perfect. His coordination remained flawless. But Rodriguez was simply not present when the claws arrived. It was like fighting smoke or shadows, opponents that existed just long enough to avoid destruction before reappearing somewhere else. "Stand still and fight!" Zrakthor roared, his translator broadcasting the challenge in multiple languages. "I am fighting," Rodriguez replied calmly, never taking his eyes off his opponent. "You're just not hitting me." The distinction between those two statements would become legendary in galactic military academies for generations to come. Zrakthor increased his attack tempo, using advanced combinations that required split-second timing and perfect coordination between all 4 limbs. These were techniques that had eliminated the best warriors of 17 different species, patterns of destruction that had never been successfully defended. Rodriguez began his counterattack. While avoiding the 4th combination in Zrakthor's sequence, Rodriguez's right hand briefly contacted the Valkyrian's extended claw. The touch was so light that it barely registered as contact, yet something small transferred from Rodriguez's hand to Zrakthor's exoskeleton. Zrakthor felt nothing and continued his assault. 3 more similar touches occurred over the next minute of combat, each so subtle that they appeared accidental, each depositing microscopic quantities of specific chemical compounds onto Zrakthor's carapace. The compounds were individually harmless, naturally occurring elements that appeared in dozens of worlds' atmospheres and posed no threat to Valkyrian biology. When combined, they created something entirely different. Rodriguez's tablet computer, seemingly forgotten in his equipment pile, was actually conducting real-time chemical analysis of the arena's atmosphere and monitoring the compound's interaction with Valkyrian biochemistry. The device calculated precise mixture ratios, atmospheric dispersal patterns, and optimal activation timing with the cold efficiency of advanced human technology. Zrakthor's attacks began to slow. At first, the change was so subtle that only Rodriguez noticed it, a claw strike arriving a fraction of a second later than intended, a combination sequence slightly less fluid than before. Recovery time between attacks marginally extended. The effects could have been attributed to fatigue or frustration, but Rodriguez recognized the signs of his chemical warfare beginning to take effect. The compounds were targeting specific neural pathways responsible for coordination and reaction time. Not enough to cause permanent damage or trigger medical intervention protocols, but sufficient to gradually degrade combat effectiveness. Zrakthor remained strong, dangerous, and motivated, but his superhuman reflexes were slowly becoming merely superior reflexes. Rodriguez began pressing his advantage. His evasive movements became more aggressive, carrying him closer to Zrakthor's position and forcing the larger being to react to threats rather than creating them. Rodriguez's water bottle, when accidentally knocked over during a particularly close exchange, released an aerosol that enhanced the chemical effects already in progress. Zrakthor realized something was wrong when he missed Rodriguez by a full meter on a strike that should have connected perfectly. His claws felt slightly sluggish, his reactions marginally delayed, his perfect combat coordination subtly degraded. The effects were mild enough that he remained dangerous, but significant enough to eliminate his overwhelming advantages. "What have you done?" he demanded, confusion replacing confidence in his voice. "I'm fighting the way humans fight," Rodriguez replied, circling to Zrakthor's left side where his reaction time had become most compromised. "We don't beat superior opponents by being stronger or faster. We beat them by being smarter." For the first time in 2 decades, Zrakthor found himself in an even fight. The revelation terrified him. Rodriguez struck with surgical precision, targeting nerve clusters that Zrakthor's compromised reflexes could no longer adequately defend. Each blow was calculated for maximum psychological impact with minimal physical damage, strikes that demonstrated complete vulnerability without causing permanent injury. Rodriguez could have ended the fight with lethal force at any point, but chose instead to systematically dismantle Zrakthor's confidence while leaving him physically capable of surrender. The audience watched in stunned silence as the galaxy's most feared warrior was methodically outfought by a being 1/4 his size using nothing but superior tactics and preparation. No overwhelming firepower, no advanced weapons technology, no physical advantages, just intelligence applied to combat with ruthless efficiency. Zrakthor attempted one final desperate combination, putting everything he had left into a coordinated 4-limb attack designed to overwhelm Rodriguez through pure desperation. The human stepped inside the attack envelope, positioned himself at the precise angle where none of the claws could reach him, and placed one hand gently against Zrakthor's throat. "Yield," Rodriguez said quietly. "You fought well, but this is over." The arena fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems and the nervous breathing of 47 different species trying to process what they had just witnessed. Zrakthor looked down at the small human hand positioned at his most vulnerable spot and realized that Rodriguez could have killed him at any point during the last 10 minutes of combat. Every missed strike, every failed combination, every frustrated attack had been Rodriguez demonstrating superior capability while offering his opponent every chance to surrender with dignity. The human had been showing mercy. "I yield," Zrakthor said, the words coming out as a whisper that the arena's sensors amplified for all observers to hear clearly. Rodriguez stepped back immediately, his hand leaving Zrakthor's throat as he returned to a non-threatening posture. The gesture was small, but significant. He had proven his point without humiliating his opponent further. In Velkarian culture, such restraint from a position of absolute advantage represented the highest form of warrior honor. The silence that followed stretched across the arena like a physical presence. Representatives from 47 species processed what they had just witnessed through the filters of their own military traditions and cultural assumptions. Some understood immediately that they had just watched a demonstration of capabilities far beyond anything they had previously attributed to humanity. Others required more time to absorb the implications of such a methodical dismantling of supposedly superior opposition. Zrakthor remained in the center of the arena, his massive form somehow diminished despite his physical size remaining unchanged. For 2 decades, he had defined himself through military superiority and the fear he inspired in potential opponents. Now he stood facing the realization that his entire worldview had been based on incomplete information about what constituted true strength. "How?" he asked, looking at Rodriguez with something approaching respect for the first time since they had met. "Your species appears weak. You have no natural weapons, no obvious advantages. How do you fight like this?" Rodriguez considered the question carefully before answering. In his experience, the most important battles were often won or lost in the conversations that followed actual combat. How he explained human capabilities would determine whether this demonstration led to increased respect or increased fear throughout the galactic community. "We evolved as persistence hunters," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the arena. "On our world, we weren't the fastest or strongest predators. We couldn't fly like some species or swim better than others, but we could outlast anything. We could track prey for days, wearing them down through endurance and intelligence until they had no choice but to surrender." The explanation was simple enough that most species could understand the concept, but profound enough that military strategists would spend years analyzing its implications. "We learned to use tools because our bodies weren't sufficient by themselves. We learned to cooperate because individual humans couldn't survive alone. We learned to think ahead because immediate reactions weren't enough to overcome superior opponents. Everything about human evolution taught us that victory comes from preparation, adaptation, and refusing to accept defeat." Ambassador Chen watched from the observation deck with growing understanding. For 3 days, various species had attempted to intimidate her delegation through displays of superior technology, physical capabilities, or military might. She had responded with diplomatic patience, not because humans lacked the ability to respond with force, but because they had learned to choose their battles carefully. Rodriguez was proving that when humans did choose to fight, they fought to win. "Your chemical attack," Zrakthor continued, his analytical mind working through the tactical details even in defeat. "Those compounds you used, they are not weapons by standard definition." "Cleaning supplies," Rodriguez confirmed. "Atmospheric purifiers, medical disinfectants, common industrial compounds. Things you can find on any space station. We don't need exotic weapons when ordinary materials can be combined creatively." The audience began to murmur as the implications sank in. Human victory had not required superior technology or overwhelming firepower. Rodriguez had used readily available materials and tactical thinking to neutralize advantages that should have been insurmountable. The demonstration suggested that human military capabilities might be far more dangerous than anyone had suspected, precisely because they appeared so mundane. Zrakthor's respect for his opponent increased as he understood the full scope of what had happened. "You could have killed me at any point during the last 10 minutes. "Yes," Rodriguez agreed without hesitation. "But killing you would have proven nothing except that humans can be as brutal as anyone else. Defeating you while offering mercy proves that we choose restraint from a position of strength rather than weakness." The distinction would reshape galactic diplomatic relationships for generations. Council security arrived to provide medical assistance, though neither combatant required significant treatment. Rodriguez had received minor scratches from close encounters with Zrakthor's claws, while the Velkarian's injuries were primarily to his pride and worldview rather than his physical form. As they departed the arena, Zrakthor paused beside Rodriguez. "What happens now? In Velkarian tradition, the defeated owes service to the victor until honor is restored." Rodriguez shook his head. "Human tradition says that two warriors who have tested each other honestly owe each other respect, nothing more. You fought with courage and skill. The outcome doesn't change that. For someone who had built his entire identity around military dominance, Zrakthor found the human concept of mutual honor both foreign and appealing. In Velkarian culture, defeat meant submission and shame. In human culture, apparently, defeat could mean the beginning of mutual understanding between worthy opponents. "I would like to learn more about human military philosophy," Zrakthor said formally. "If your people would accept a Velkarian student." "I think that could be arranged," Rodriguez replied with the first smile he had shown since arriving at the station. The formal council session that followed the arena demonstration was unlike any in recent galactic history. Ambassador Chen's presentation on human capabilities and intentions was listened to with attention that bordered on reverence rather than the polite disinterest that had characterized previous sessions. Species that had dismissed humanity as another minor addition to the Council's membership now recognized that they had been observing a civilization capable of far more than their initial assessment suggested. The Thornican delegate formally apologized for his earlier mockery. The Zilani representative requested detailed information about human military traditions. The Moravian ambassador withdrew his suggestion that humans might serve better as servants than equals. More importantly, the underlying power dynamics of the galactic community began to shift. For centuries, the Council had operated under the assumption that military strength could be accurately measured through visible capabilities: ship counts, weapon yields, territorial control, and the size of standing armies. The human demonstration introduced the concept that true military effectiveness might be better measured through factors that remained invisible until deployed: intelligence, adaptability, preparation, the willingness to fight unconventionally when conventional approaches proved insufficient. Over the following days, human stock rose dramatically in galactic political calculations. Species that had planned to exploit human naivety found themselves reconsidering their approaches. Military planners throughout the known galaxy began developing new assessment protocols that accounted for capabilities that might remain hidden until absolutely necessary. The betting networks that had given Rodriguez impossible odds quietly disappeared, their operators having learned expensive lessons about underestimating unknown quantities. Rodriguez himself became something of a legend, though he handled the attention with the same professional calm he had demonstrated in the arena. When pressed for interviews about human military capabilities, he consistently deflected toward broader themes of cooperation and peaceful development. The most dangerous predator in known space, it seemed, preferred to talk about diplomatic solutions and mutual understanding. Ambassador Chen's petition for council membership passed by unanimous vote. 6 months later, the human embassy on Kepler Station had become one of the most popular diplomatic destinations in the galaxy. Species that had never shown interest in Earth suddenly discovered urgent needs for cultural exchange programs, scientific cooperation agreements, and military consultation services. Rodriguez found himself assigned as military liaison, a position that involved far more teaching than fighting. Warrior classes from dozens of species attended his lectures on tactical thinking, strategic planning, and the philosophy of violence as a last resort rather than a first response. His most dedicated student was Zrakthor, who had formally requested assignment as the first Velkarian exchange officer in human military service. "I still don't understand," Zrakthor confessed during one of their regular training sessions. "Your people possess capabilities that could dominate the galaxy. Why do you choose cooperation over conquest?" Rodriguez paused his review of joint tactical exercises to consider the question. After 6 months of working together, he had developed genuine respect for the former Velkarian warrior. Zrakthor's transformation from feared predator to thoughtful strategic analyst represented everything Rodriguez admired about the possibility of change through mutual understanding. "Because conquest is easy," Rodriguez finally replied. "Any species with sufficient technology can take what they want through force. But building something lasting, something that benefits everyone involved, that requires real strength, the kind of strength that can't be measured in weapons or ship counts." "You fight to avoid fighting," Zrakthor observed. "We fight to create conditions where fighting becomes unnecessary," Rodriguez corrected. "Sometimes that means demonstrating capability. Sometimes it means offering alternatives. Sometimes it means accepting short-term disadvantages to achieve long-term stability." The philosophy would eventually spread throughout the galactic community as other species recognized the benefits of the human approach. Military academies that had focused exclusively on tactics and weapons began offering courses in strategic restraint and conflict de-escalation. Diplomatic protocols evolved to include options other than submission or domination. The galaxy became a more stable place, though it took years for most observers to recognize the connection between human membership in the Council and the gradual decline in interspecies conflicts. Rodriguez never sought credit for the changes his demonstration had inspired. When pressed about his role in galactic transformation, he consistently pointed out that lasting peace required the efforts of beings from dozens of species working toward common goals. His victory over Zrakthor had opened a conversation, but the real work was being done by diplomats, scientists, and ordinary citizens who chose cooperation over conflict in their daily interactions. On quiet evenings in the embassy, however, Rodriguez sometimes reflected on the broader implications of that afternoon in the arena. In less than 20 minutes, he had demonstrated principles that would reshape galactic civilization for generations, that true strength came from restraint rather than aggression, that intelligence could overcome any advantage, and that the most feared predators were often those who chose not to hunt. The galaxy was learning that when humans said they came in peace, it was not because they lacked alternatives. It was because peace was what they had chosen. And anything humans chose to do, they did very, very well. The smart money was on a very quick fight.